Welcome to the Two Doors podcast, where we open the doors to Australia's top minds in tech, talent, and transformation. Hosted by Alexander Gill, founder of Two Doors Recruitment, we cut through the noise with real conversations from leaders building the future of work. Subscribe to the show to hear and see more of these types of conversations. Let's get into it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Two Doors podcast, and I am here with Shah Ghaffurian, who is the co-founder of Magic, a consultative media agency working at the intersection of creative, customer experience, and analytics. With a background in performing marketing and data-driven growth, Shah is focused on solving a fundamental challenge in modern marketing. How do we determine what actually grows business? At Magic, he's helping reshape the traditional agency model, moving beyond channel metrics and siloed delivery to build integrated, outcome-driven systems that align media, creative, and owned platforms around real business impact. In an industry flooded with noise, disconnected workflows, and fragmented advice, Shah's work is about bringing clarity, coordination, and commercial thinking back to the center of conversation. Shah, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Matt. Great to be here.
I'm very excited. So for anyone that doesn't know Shah, he is a very smart creative, and I'm excited for today. So what's been going on?
Look, it's end of financial year. We're doing a lot of planning for ourselves and our clients at the moment. We're coming up to a lot more questions around clients that have been kind of struggling with their business growth over the last couple of years. And answering that fundamental question, what can we do in marketing that actually does grow businesses in a measurable way in their P&Ls?
Because is it changing much at the moment?
I think so. I think there's a lot more noise generally in the market around what works and what doesn't. And for so long, clients have gotten so used in digital media seeing, hey, we spent this much dollars on Meta, Google Ads, display, whatever it is, and here's how many sales we drove on the other side. And reporting will tell them this, but many of them are noticing that the numbers that are being reported by these platforms don't actually marry up to their actual business growth. So we're being tasked with the question, what does actually grow our businesses?
And it's ever evolving, isn't it? It's like we were having a very different conversation 10 years ago because Meta wasn't really as prominent.
Yeah, so I feel like this problem has been around for at least 10 years. I remember in one of my very first jobs in media and advertising, I was working on a very big client who shall be unnamed, and I realized very quickly that my goal was to basically get as many sales on a digital report in any given week. And this brand sold a lot of products. So the easiest way for me to get the most sales on my digital report was to serve out one impression to everybody in Australia every week. And what that effect would be is when that person ended up buying that product anyway, my digital report would say that I drove that sale. But the reality was all I was doing was gaming the system into effectively giving me credit for all the sales this company made. And I was lauded as being very good at digital media, but I was really just tricking the platforms. I feel like where we're at the moment when it comes to digital is very similar to this, except it's gotten cleverer. So as opposed to one impression to everybody in a market, Facebook, Google, all the other platforms, they use their incredible AI algorithms to basically work out on any signal that someone has in terms of their online profile when somebody is about to buy a product and then serve them an impression or a click, and then they buy the products they were going to anyway, and that platform then takes credit for it. And we found this very recently with a few clients that we were changing our media buying strategies. The numbers in Meta, Google Ads, etc., were going up hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially in any given week. And the temptation was to pat ourselves on the back. Hey, look how much more revenue we've driven you, the client. But we didn't believe in it. So we would take a few steps back and be like, well, has this business materially grown in their revenue from before and after we were driving all this additional revenue and platform? And the answer often was no. So we kind of knew this fundamentally. We've done a lot of market mix modeling, etc. But what we were being told by the platforms was wrong. So the question we had to answer for ourselves is, what can we do that will actually grow the business? And it's one of these things in the market at the moment where we can say a departure from using AI is actually the way forward.
Wow, that's huge. That's a bold that I like that a lot. And how can companies get ahead in this time?
So it's a big question, that one, in many ways. I think that there's so much noise in the market at the moment. There are so many different things that companies are being told around what works and what doesn't. And everybody who is trying to sell you either a particular media, a media buy, or a platform or a piece of technology can find some way with data to justify what they're doing, about why what they're doing is actually going to drive you growth. The hardest thing that you've got to do to kind of work this out is take a step back, work with either internal teams or a modeling agency or a consultative group, and be like, what is the shared set of metrics that we can use to judge effectiveness of all of our marketing activity that is transmissible across all of them? Now, in my mind, there's really only two ways to do this because there's so much noise in market. One is through using advanced statistics and modeling. Your audience will be very familiar with something like market mix modeling. There are many companies doing this really well in market, including Profit, who I'm involved with, Mutant Analytics Partners. What they do is look at all of the historical data around when activity is run and when it hasn't run, and then use that to determine, well, when we turned on television in this series of months, did overall sales incrementally grow or not? And then use those changes to forecast what might happen in the future. That's great, but there are some challenges with that. The other big way of doing this is with something called incrementality testing. So what this is fundamentally about is how do you, and I'll give a very simple example, split up what your strategies are by geographic region, have a control group of a certain area, then have different test treatment groups. So for simplicity's sake, let's say Victoria control, New South Wales test group 1, Queensland test group 2. In test group 1, you might run a heavy YouTube buy, and then in test group 2, you might run a heavy TV buy. Did these other two states outperform versus the control group? And in that way, if you could do this as an always-on strategy, you can actually pick apart what is incrementally growing your business. Now, I've really simplified this down. This is way harder than that. The truth is, let's say that there was a weather event in New South Wales that completely screwed it over in terms of a test group. Your whole test would be fucked. So you've got to pick the way you break this out far more scientifically than that. But it's really what we're leaning into now as an agency. How do we break out all these different geo-regions, test different strategies, and then work out what truly drives growth? And we're kind of ignoring what platforms say at the moment because we think they're full of shit. Now, let me go one step further here. I started a media agency. I've worked in media agencies my entire life. I believe for the longest amount of time that the most important thing you could do to drive a business growth was to get targeting right in terms of your audiences and to focus on the right, buy media at the cheapest rate and fiddle with all the knobs and dials and the platforms. What the truth is now in terms of how you actually make advertising perform better, it has only about a third of the ball was in my court. The other two things that are incredibly important is creative and CX. So creative has always been important, but it's even more important now than it ever has been, where because of how good the AI is in these platforms, I'll use Meta as an example, but it applies to everything. If I upload an asset into Meta that says something like, do you have itchy skin? Here's a product that will solve for that. That asset will natively find people who that message engages with. And I'll give you an example. I consistently get ads saying, hey, agency owner. There is no targeting group in Meta that's for agency owners. It's because that asset has been developed specifically to talk to what I'm interested in. So the old days of creative was let's make a message that is as general as possible that we can broadcast out to everybody and then en masse get the most average uplift. So you talk to like the most general audience possible. Now where creators moving is, I'll reframe it as content, which is how do you take what your brand is, segment it out into all of the different need states that it can potentially solve for, and then iterate and build content over time to basically reinforce those messages. So the pressure on creative to be so much more high-paced, have such higher velocity and so many more variations is exploding, and getting that right and coupling it with media is one of the core things that businesses have to get right if they want to grow. Now, that solves the problem of, well, what happens when you kind of out in market talking to people? The next big question is, well, once someone actually clicks on that ad, what is their experience like? Does that ad that talks to itchy skin then send someone to a landing page that also reinforces that's the problem that you solve, and how? What's the experience once they first then click on that ad? What's the sequence of messages they get after that? Once they buy the first time, what emails and additional comms they get, etc. Nailing all of that post-click ecosystem as well is just as important as sending them the right message and targeting in the right way upfront. And where that moves to is media's role is to get basically qualified people to the right site. Creator's role is to segment and solve problems. CX's role is to engage, reinforce the problems they solve, and ultimately re-engage them over and over again to increase that customer's lifetime value. If you can get all three of those working in unison, in my mind, that is the key way that brands can actually grow.
That's huge. I love it. Thank you for the explanation.
No problem.
And going back to one of the things you mentioned there as well, I don't want to brush over it, but you talked about incremental gains.
Yes.
What's the importance of that?
So we talk a bit about there's attributed sales versus incremental sales. Let me break that down a little bit. Attributed means that in effect, it's someone saying that they have put a message in front of somebody and then they've ended up buying the product. What that doesn't account for is, and the simplest example of this is you bidding on a brand search term. So if you're, I don't know, Honda, and you buy ads when people type in the word Honda on Google Ads and they click on that Honda Google search ad and then book a test drive, did they book a test drive because that search ad appeared, or are they going to do that anyway and that ad just intercepted their journey and then took credit for it? That's the most base level, but attributed sales generally will have a very large portion of sales or whatever it is that would have occurred had that ad never run. Incremental sales is the flip side of that, is how many sales would we have driven if the ad never run? And what's the difference between those two deltas? So the way we focus all of our efforts as a business is trying to specifically determine what actually drives incremental sales, and we don't give a shit about attributed.
It's very important, isn't it, for companies to have that mindset as well, because you've got to keep chasing that improvement. And in terms of technology, so how is technology affecting the industry?
Massively. So I will say that I get this question a bit just generally. Even like some juniors in my organization are a bit concerned about the future of their roles and because of the advent of AI. And I've spoken to other agencies across CX, creative, and all that around this as well. So media agencies, I think, are probably the original prompt engineers in many ways.
Yeah.
So Meta, Google, all these different companies have had algorithms, they used to call them, as a way to determine what to buy. And it was our job to basically set up the right data inputs and creative and platform structures to basically get the most out of those algorithms. So I think media agencies are probably pretty well placed for the future of that, because we've been working with AI for about 10 years in that sense. What's changing, though, is more decision-making is happening by algorithms versus people. Do you remember Cambridge Analytica?
Yeah.
So that was one of those times when it was the most possible control that a media buyer would have. They were doing things like narrowing down to a certain sub-segment of like persona and whatever it was, and then being like, this person's emotional need is this, let's serve them a message that's going to piss them off effectively. And so they would have all these like hundreds, if not thousands, of target audience segments. They would go after all these different messages. What's changed is now you don't do that whatsoever. You plug a message into the platform, and then based on what the message is, it will find the person that will engage with it most. Huge change, because the day-to-day activity of buying media is so different than what it used to be. So what that means for us is more of our focus as a business isn't now twiddling of those knobs and dials. There's no under the hood mechanics almost. We've had to think about the way we level up our thinking to be not media buyers as a profession, but more along the lines of consultants and business strategists. So the conversation I'm having with everyone in my agency is we can no longer solve media problems. We have to solve business problems. And then media is one lever within that. How do we look across everything the business is doing within marketing, without, work out what is growing them or impeding that growth, and then make recommendations alongside of that. So our business is kind of moving from a media agency with media buying skills into somewhat of a hybrid media consultative business with business acumen as a core. So that's a part of what's changing for us. But I'm speaking to creative agencies and web development agencies, etc., and their view is we aren't really hiring junior talent anymore, because the jobs that junior talent used to do are kind of being dissolved by what the AI platforms are allowing more mid-level people to do. So there's this massive flattening almost of org structures around the middle, where the ability to use tools speeds up all of this low complexity work. And unless businesses in general, in terms of marketing agencies, can level up into the skill set of business advisory, their jobs are kind of going to be eaten up by automation and AI.
And it's a huge point, because I'm seeing that a lot with the market, is these juniors, you can be replaced. And we had at the end of the last season, we got invited by AWS to do like a whole fireside panel chat, and we had 50 juniors in the audience. And what came from it was like, you have to be curious, you've got to be a great communicator, think outside the box, be proactive, build networks, because tools can replace these juniors, right? But if we don't have the juniors, you don't have the mids in a few years, and then you don't have the seniors. So this will change.
I think just the model was a bit wrong for agencies, is my view. So
tell me more.
I don't mean it's been right in the past, but applying what happened in the past, what is going to happen in the future, isn't the right way to think about this. If I think about me back at university, we'll say 15 years ago, and I remember looking at the stream of potential jobs of consulting groups. And the way they hire juniors is so different than the way an agency would. To be fair, there's probably a lot more promises of wealth and riches on that side of the fence, so they can maybe take a bit more of a discerning approach. But their interview process for a brand new person would focus on things like, how do you solve a business problem? How do you think strategically? What's your critical thinking like? Are you curious? I know some of the best firms had processes where they would ask questions like, I am a business that does this. Here's a problem I'm facing. How do you respond? It's quite an ask of somebody in a media agency who's starting a brand new role to think like that. But the reality is, those jobs aren't going to be, well, we'll teach you everything on the job to start off with. You're going to have some form of aptitude around business to then start in those roles, because from day one, the problems you're going to be solving are business problems. So I think the way it has to shift is, instead of hiring for, we'll call it more basic level tasks, you're going to have to hire for more full functional across the whole spectrum roles. And juniors will still exist, but what they're doing will just be different.
Yeah. And it's that old, I don't know if you've seen that statistic where it's like 65% of jobs will be something we've never heard of coming through, and getting as much juice out of you as I possibly can, Shah. Tell us, how do you drive a high retention culture?
So I think a big part of this was me coming up through media and media agencies over the last 10 to 15 years. There were so many occasions where I was so frustrated with the operating model and how those businesses treated their staff. It was a mixture of, being unclear around what progression looked like, what my development was. There was a misalignment with the expectations on me versus other people, etc. And so many of these things built up this bank of a business that I didn't want to run. The reality is, obviously, as I've moved into this role, there are some things that are harder to kind of do in the perfect way that I imagined. But I think that as a core ethos is a big part of it. I think the other thing is many media agencies and businesses in general will have an approach where they just let shit roll downhill. So the long hours, the bad work, all of that kind of stuff, the hard questions often would just be pushed from C-suite onto middle managers who will then put that pressure onto juniors and create this culture of almost burnout. We tend to have the opposite approach to our business where as an SLT, we tend to shield a bit more and protect, I believe, wherever we can. And then the other big thing is we very much try to hire based on curiosity and ambition. And another thing from my history was I never stayed in a role longer than 3 years because I would get bored, basically, because the problems wouldn't change. So I think that we adapt so much as a business so quickly, just generally, that the kinds of challenges and problems we try to give our staff keep changing. It feeds their curiosity, ambition. At the same time, we kind of pay them right and treat them well when it comes to the way we develop them. That collectively, we've ended up with a business that in the 6 years that it's been running has only had 2 people leave the business through to move to other companies. And they move to other industries as well. So and they still come to our drinks to catch up with everyone else.
Well, that's fantastic. And there was a key point in there that you said as well, that you shield others from the problems.
Yeah.
And that's a core leadership principle that not everyone talks about, where it's like, hey, you're not supposed to, just because of director coming to you as a leader, you're not supposed to just tell everyone else. It's like, no, you look after that. That's like parenthood almost.
Yeah.
And bringing this into land, Shah, is there any final wisdoms, anything you'd love to share with the audience?
I think something we're talking a lot about at the moment is how we can answer this problem of how to help businesses grow. And the thing that we're noticing is the biggest barrier to this is how siloed functions are within businesses that need to work together. So a simple example would be the media and media agency are separate from the creative agency and the creative teams at clients, which is separate from the web development and the web development agency, which is separate from the data team at the client. And at the end of the day, the board and the CMO are all trying to answer a business problem that might be, let's grow market share or sales or whatever it is. And it gets filtered down into separate briefs with different businesses or teams working on the same problem, but pulling in different directions. And it's so inefficient. And the better outcome is by aligning all of these different areas and agencies, pulling in the same direction. So I think my single piece of advice is, how do we better collaborate across these different silos? And having that as a core part of the way you think about briefs and bring teams together is probably the biggest unlock to incremental business growth.
I love that collaboration. That's brilliant, Shah. Well, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
If you've liked this episode, please like and subscribe. It helps the growth of the channel so we can keep interviewing some of the best minds that there are here. Thank you very much.